October 9, 1942. Over the dense jungle of Guadalcanal, 20,000 feet in the air, American pilot Marion Carl was fighting for his life. He was flying a Grumman F-4F Wildcat, a heavy and stubby fighter built for carriers, and he was being hunted. His pursuer was a Mitsubishi A6M0, a plane so fast, agile, and deadly it seemed almost supernatural. It could turn inside the Wildcat's radius twice over, climb like a rocket, and strike with deadly accuracy. For over a year, the Zero had dominated the skies from Pearl Harbor to the Philippines. Leaving a trail of destruction, Carl dove to escape. Trying to use the Wildcat's speed, but the Zero stayed glued to his tail. The Japanese pilot anticipated every move. Suddenly, Carl's cockpit exploded. Shrapnel tore through his leg, his controls went dead, and his plane plummeted toward the shark-infested waters below. Miraculously, Carl survived, rescued by luck and courage, but the message was clear. The skies over Guadalcanal were a graveyard. The Cactus Air Force, as the press called them, had become living proof of war's brutal reality. American pilots were being fed into the teeth of the Japanese air machine, one by one, and the doctrine taught back in the States was failing. This was the chaotic, swirling, deadly world that a 27-year-old farmer from South Dakota was about to enter. Joe Foss was not a trained ace, nor a decorated soldier. He was a man whose experience came from fields and hunting grounds, not battlefields. Yet this ordinary farm boy would step into this crucible and change everything. Foss's arrival was the beginning of a story almost too incredible to believe. The Pacific Air War had made one thing clear: American pilots were vulnerable. Doctrine told them to dive, use speed, never turn with a Zero. But in reality, these rules were killing them. Veterans of the Japanese Air Force had fought over China and Pearl Harbor, knew their planes intimately, and baited American pilots into deadly turns. The Wildcat, slow and heavy, was easy prey for the nimble Zero. Every mission was a test of life and death, and most pilots did not survive long. But what the Japanese could not have predicted was that an entirely new approach was arriving. A man with no formal combat experience, no high-tech solutions, and no support from military engineers was about to introduce a strategy that would redefine the rules of engagement. He would use anticipation, precision, and a skill learned not in a classroom, but in hunting jackrabbits on the frozen plains of South Dakota. This was Joe Foss, the farmer who would become America's ace of aces. Over the next 44 days, he would shoot down 26 Japanese planes. He would turn the graveyard of Henderson Field into a battlefield of triumph. The story was not just about planes, bullets, or tactics. It was about ingenuity, courage, and the relentless determination of a man who refused to be defeated. This is the story of how one ordinary farmer's extraordinary trick changed the course of the Pacific Air War forever. Joe Foss was born in 1915 on a remote, unelectrified farm near South Falls, South Dakota. His childhood was far from ordinary. It wasn't spent in classrooms, reading books, or playing games. It was spent in the dirt, under the harsh wind, and in the freezing cold of the Great Plains. Life was unforgiving. The land was rough, the crops unreliable, and the Great Depression made survival even harder. Foss's family had almost nothing. To eat, Joe and his father had to hunt. They would track deer, rabbits, and other game across frozen fields. It was during these hunts that Foss developed a skill that would define his life: deflection shooting. Hunting jackrabbits is not easy. Rabbits don't run straight. They dart, weave, and reverse unpredictably. To hit them, you cannot aim at where they are. You have to aim at where they will be. Foss learned to calculate speed, lead, and wind instantly in his mind. While other kids were learning arithmetic, he was mastering anticipation, timing, and spatial calculation. Every shot counted. A wasted bullet was a wasted meal. By the age of 12, Foss was not just a good marksman. He was a predator. He understood the science of moving targets, a skill that no military manual could teach. His father had given him one rule: never waste a shell. That simple advice would shape the man who would one day face the deadliest plains in the Pacific. But Joe Foss had dreams bigger than hunting rabbits. At 18, he attended an air show with his father and saw a Marine Corps squadron flying biplanes. The planes twisted and dived through the sky with perfect precision. Foss was mesmerized. "That's what I'm going to do," he told his father. It wasn't just a dream. It was a calling. But the path was not easy. Foss was poor, uneducated, and after his father's tragic death in an accident with a downed power line, he had to drop out of school to run the farm. Trapped by responsibility, he still nurtured his dream of flying. He worked the farm by day and took night classes, slowly earning enough credits over 6 years to enter college. He labored through washing dishes and odd jobs to fund flying lessons. Every challenge strengthened his determination. The hunter's patience and precision translated into discipline, focus, and relentless grit. These were not just farm lessons. They were life lessons. They prepared Foss for a battlefield where quick thinking and instinct would be more valuable than technology or doctrine. By the time the United States entered World War II, Joe Foss was 26, a man shaped by the plains, the hardships of the farm, and years of precision hunting. He had the body of a farmer but the mind of a predator. His skill, developed over years of survival, would soon be tested in a way no one could imagine, against the deadliest fighter aircraft of the Pacific War. The hunter was ready. The fields of South Dakota had trained him to anticipate, calculate, and act decisively. Little did anyone know that these humble beginnings would give rise to America's ace of aces. Joe Foss's dream of flying seemed impossible. He was a poor farm boy, burdened with responsibility after his father's tragic death, and living in rural South Dakota far from opportunity. But his desire to soar through the skies was relentless. In 1933, at the age of 18, he attended an air show with his father and witnessed Marine Corps biplanes performing incredible stunts, diving and twisting with precision. Foss was captivated. That moment crystallized his goal. He would fly, no matter the cost. The path was far from easy. To even qualify for pilot training, Foss needed an education he didn't have. He worked the farm by day, plowing fields and tending livestock, while taking night classes to earn the credits necessary for college. Every lesson, every exam was a step toward the cockpit. Determination became his constant companion. By the age of 19, he had endured hardships most teenagers could never imagine. Yet his vision never wavered. While other young men were carefree, Foss was mastering survival, discipline, and calculation, all skills that would later make him an extraordinary pilot. With education slowly coming together, Foss turned his attention to flying. He saved every dollar he could, taking odd jobs, washing dishes, and working long hours to afford flying lessons. Each hour in the air, each maneuver in the sky, sharpened his instincts and refined his natural skills. He wasn't just learning to fly. He was training his mind to anticipate movement, a skill honed over years hunting jackrabbits on the plains. He learned that precision, timing, and patience were more than survival tools. They were weapons. Then came the attack on Pearl Harbor in December 1941. America was at war, and Joe Foss, now 26, raced to enlist in the Navy to become a fighter pilot. But the military rejected him. He was too old. The age limit for fighter pilots was 25. Instead of giving up, Foss found a loophole. He joined the Marine Corps Reserve as an instructor, teaching younger men how to fly. It was frustrating to train others while being denied combat, but Foss turned anger into determination. He became known as the most persistent, demanding, and vocal instructor, a man who would not take no for an answer. For 9 months he watched the young men he trained sent off to war, some never to return. His anger grew, but so did his resolve. Finally, to silence him, the Marines relented. Foss was sent to advanced fighter training, assigned to the VMF 121 Squadron. At last his dream was within reach. But the reality awaiting him was brutal. He would be stepping into the Pacific Theater, facing the deadliest enemy pilots in the world, flying a plane considered inferior to the Japanese Zero. He was 27, a man who had once chased rabbits across snowy fields, about to hunt enemy fighters in the sky. Joe Foss's journey from farm boy to marine pilot was not just about perseverance. It was about the fusion of skill, instinct, and courage. The years spent in harsh conditions, the hours spent hunting with precise calculation, and the relentless pursuit of an impossible dream had prepared him for the crucible ahead. He was ready to face Guadalcanal, to turn doctrine on its head, and to become the ace of aces America desperately needed. The hunter was about to enter the jungle skies. October 1942. Joe Foss, 27-year-old farm boy turned marine pilot, arrived at Henderson Field on Guadalcanal. He was stepping into hell. The airfield was far from a well-organized military base. It was a battered mud and gravel strip carved out of dense palm trees. Everywhere Foss looked, wreckage littered the ground. Dozens of F-4F Wildcats, planes meant to fight the Japanese, were scattered along the runway, wings torn off, engines shattered, cockpits mangled. The place had earned the grim nickname, the Graveyard, from the pilots stationed there, a title that perfectly captured the reality of the Pacific Air War. The air was thick, humid, and suffused with the smell of engine oil, rotting jungle and death. It was a constant reminder that every mission here could be a man's last. Foss met the men he would fly with. These were not fresh-faced recruits. Their eyes were bloodshot, their faces pale and worn. Many were veterans of brutal aerial combat, marked by the anti-malaria drug Atabrine and countless sleepless nights. They were haunted by the ghosts of fallen comrades. And then Foss arrived, a man they viewed as new meat, another body waiting to replace someone lost yesterday. He was assigned a Grumman F-4F Wildcat, the same type of plane that had nearly killed Marion Carl just weeks earlier. Heavy, slow, and underpowered compared to the Japanese Zero, it was considered a flying coffin by anyone who understood the risks. Foss listened to the standard briefing from the squadron's executive officer. The doctrine was clear: never turn with a Zero, never chase them, use your speed and armor to dive and escape. It was the formula the Americans had been taught, and the formula that had been failing them for months. Foss nodded, absorbing the words. But in his mind, the rules were incomplete. His farmer's instincts, honed by years hunting jackrabbits, told him something different. Survival required anticipation, precision, and strategy. That first night in the tent, Foss could hear the distant rumble of engines and the sporadic gunfire echoing across the island. This was the reality of Guadalcanal, a meat grinder for inexperienced pilots and a constant reminder of the stakes. He was surrounded by veterans, men who had flown countless sorties and survived. Yet he felt an edge, a quiet confidence born from the same skill that had once made him deadly with a shotgun. While others relied on speed and doctrine, Foss had anticipation, patience, and a unique understanding of motion and trajectory. In the early morning light, Foss climbed into his Wildcat for the first mission. The sky over Guadalcanal was treacherous. Enemy fighters could appear from any direction, attacking from the sun, the clouds, or the jungle canopy below. The ghosts of Henderson Field watched as he taxied to the runway. To them he was inexperienced, untested, and perhaps doomed. But to Foss, the battlefield was another hunting ground, and he was ready to prove that a man with the eyes of a predator could outthink the deadliest pilots in the Pacific. That day marked the beginning of a transformation. Joe Foss was no longer just a farm boy. He was becoming a tactician, a hunter, and ultimately, a legend. The Graveyard would soon witness something unprecedented, the rise of a pilot whose methods defied doctrine and whose courage would rewrite the rules of aerial combat. Joe Foss's first mission over Guadalcanal was not a practice run. It was a trial by fire. The sky was empty at first, a vast expanse of blue stretching endlessly. But in the distance, the radio crackled with a warning. "Bandits, 11 how high." Foss looked up and saw them, a formation of Mitsubishi Zeros, sleek, agile, and deadly. Faster than anything he had flown against before, they were the reason American pilots had been losing the air war over the Pacific. Doctrine said to dive and run, to never engage directly. But Foss's instincts told him something else. He had learned to anticipate movement in a very different way from years of hunting jackrabbits across the plains of South Dakota. Rabbits don't run straight. They weave, they dart, and they reverse. To hit them, you aim not at where they are, but where they will be. This was the trick he was about to apply in the sky. As the Zeros closed in, Foss shoved his stick forward, putting his heavy Wildcat into a screaming dive. The plane accelerated, shaking under the strain, while traces zipped past his cockpit. Most pilots would have panicked, but Foss remained calm. His eyes scanned, not at the enemy directly, but at the space ahead, calculating the path the Zero would follow, predicting its movements in real time. This was the farmer's trick, deflection shooting applied to aerial combat. In that first engagement, he didn't outturn the Zero. He didn't try to outrun it. Instead, He fired where the enemy was going to be, not where it was. His 650 caliber machine guns roared, filling the sky with a wall of lead. 1-0 exploded in a ball of fire, his first kill. Foss had not just survived. He had outthought the enemy, using skills no pilot manual could teach. The impact of this approach was immediate. His squadron watched, stunned as the farm boy's logic shattered expectations. Foss shared his method with his wingmen. Forget what they told you. Lead them. Aim where they're going, not where they are. They'll fly right into it. This simple yet revolutionary approach changed everything. Suddenly, the Wildcats were not just defenders. They became hunters. Over the next few missions, Foss applied this method relentlessly. Zeros that had once been untouchable were now falling into carefully calculated bursts of fire. The once dominant Japanese fighters began to hesitate, confused by a tactic they couldn't understand. Foss's farmer's eye, trained on frozen fields and darting rabbits, had turned the Wildcat, a plane considered inferior and slow, into a lethal weapon. By the end of his first week, Joe Foss had proven that doctrine alone was not enough to survive the skies of Guadalcanal. It was innovation, anticipation, and instinct, traits forged on a South Dakota farm, that would define him. The farmer had become a hunter in the clouds, and the Japanese Zero, for the first time, was vulnerable to a new kind of logic. After his first successful missions, Joe Foss quickly gained a reputation among his fellow pilots. The man who had arrived at Henderson Field as a 27-year-old farm boy was no longer just another replacement. He was a tactician, a hunter, and a leader. The standard doctrine of never turn with a zero had failed countless pilots, but Foss's farmer's logic had proven deadly. His squadron, initially skeptical, began to follow his methods, and in doing so, they became a force to be reckoned with. Foss took command of a small fleet of 8 Wildcats, a motley crew of misfits, cast-offs, and new arrivals. They had no flashy nickname, no famed victories to their name. But under Foss's guidance, they transformed into an organized lethal unit. Observers called them Foss's Flying Circus, a chaotic name for an extraordinarily disciplined and innovative squadron. Foss emphasized one simple principle: lead the enemy, don't follow. Anticipate their moves, fire where they will be, not where they are. Every pilot was trained to think like a hunter, to see the sky as a hunting ground rather than a battlefield. On October 16, 1942, Foss and his 8-man squadron encountered a formation of 32 Japanese aircraft. It was a suicidal engagement by any traditional standard. But Foss had a plan. He employed a new tactic called the thatch weave, flying in pairs to cover each other's tails. Foss led the dive, eyes sharp, heart steady, and instinct honed by years on the farm. The first Zero exploded before it even realized it was targeted. His wingmen executed the same logic, shooting down another. In just 10 minutes, the squadron shot down 5 enemy planes, Foss personally downing 2 of them. The effect on the Japanese pilots was immediate. Their doctrine relied on exploiting the Wildcat's weaknesses, outturn it, outmaneuver it, bait it into mistakes. Foss removed every advantage they had. His squadron didn't merely survive, they hunted. Veteran Japanese pilots returned to their carriers bewildered, reporting encounters with a Wildcat that didn't behave like a Wildcat. The enemy could not predict the movement of Foss's fighters. Their precise, machine-like strategies were being undone by a farm boy's logic. By October 23rd, only 10 days after his first kill, Joe Foss had become an ace with 5 confirmed victories. His squadron's effectiveness soared. On October 25th, he shot down 3 Zeros in a single day, solidifying his reputation as the deadliest pilot on the island. Foss was not just a skilled shooter. He was a leader who inspired confidence, teaching others that strategy, anticipation, and ingenuity mattered more than rigid adherence to doctrine. Under Foss's command, the Flying Circus dominated the skies over Guadalcanal. Their success was a mix of innovative tactics, careful coordination, and the instinctive brilliance of a hunter who had learned precision long before he ever touched a cockpit. Foss's farm boy sensibility, patience, calculation, and anticipation had turned a group of misfits into a squadron capable of taking on Japan's elite pilots and winning. The Japanese aces, confident in their Zero fighters, now faced a force they could not predict, a lesson that would echo through the Pacific for the remainder of the war. By January 1943, Joe Foss had become a legend on Guadalcanal. The 27-year-old farm boy from South Dakota had already amassed 23 confirmed kills, placing him just 3 victories away from tying the all-time American record set by World War I ace Eddie Rickenbacker, 26 kills. For 2 decades, no pilot had come close to that number, and the challenge ahead seemed almost mythical. But Foss had never been an ordinary pilot, and he had never shied away from risk. The day of reckoning arrived on January 15th, 1943. Foss was sick with malaria, his body racked with fever, yet he refused to stay grounded. A massive Japanese naval convoy, protected by a screen of fighter planes, was heading toward the island. Foss and his flying circus were scrambled to intercept. The sky erupted into chaos. Dozens of Zeros and other Japanese planes mixed with Wildcats in a swirling melee of speed, smoke, and gunfire. Despite the fever, Foss's mind was clear. He relied on his farmer's instincts, honed from years of hunting jackrabbits. He didn't just react, he anticipated. He saw a Zero locking onto a wingman and didn't follow it directly. Instead, he calculated where the enemy would be, rolled his Wildcat and fired a precise burst into empty air, exactly where the Japanese pilot would move. The Zero's engine exploded. Kill number 24. Minutes later, another Zero dove toward a different group of Wildcats. Foss executed a high-side pass, firing another perfect deflection shot. The plane disintegrated. Kill number 25. He had tied Eddie Rickenbacker's record. But Foss was not done. In the final engagement of the day, he spotted a Japanese float plane attempting to escape. Using the same deflection technique, he fired a long, arcing shot that struck the cockpit directly. The plane fell into the Pacific. Kill number 26. Joe Foss, the farm boy, had not only tied but broken the all-time American record in aerial combat. In a single afternoon, he had done what experts and veterans had thought impossible. His body may have been weakened by malaria, his hands shaking from fever, but his mind remained as sharp and precise as ever. Foss had turned a Wildcat, a plane many considered inferior, into the deadliest weapon in the Pacific, all thanks to the logic of a hunter applied to the chaos of war. When Foss landed at Henderson Field, the entire base erupted in celebration. The graveyard was no longer a place of despair. It had become a field of victory. His squadron lifted him from the cockpit, a hero in the eyes of every pilot, soldier, and crew member who had witnessed his triumph. For months, Japanese pilots had dominated the skies with confidence, but now they faced a force they could not understand, a farm boy's ingenuity, bravery, and deadly precision. Joe Foss's achievement was more than a number. It was a symbol. It proved that determination, intelligence, and instinct could overcome any technological disadvantage. It showed that even the most daunting challenges, the unbeatable Zeros, the chaos of Guadalcanal, the relentless pressures of war, could be overcome with skill, courage, and the unwavering confidence of a man who had learned to aim at where the target would be, not where it stood. Joe Foss's incredible string of victories came at a price few could imagine. By January 1943, he was not just a hero. He was a man fighting 2 battles at once, against the Japanese in the skies and against the relentless grip of malaria in his own body. Every time he climbed into his Wildcat, his vision blurred, his body weakened, and his strength drained. The disease made him shake violently, yet he refused to stop. To Foss, quitting was never an option. The farm boy's grit, the same resolve that had kept him alive on frozen South Dakota plains, now carried him through the deadliest skies in the world. Even after breaking Eddie Rickenbacker's record with 26 kills, Foss's days were filled with exhaustion and pain. His ground crew watched in awe and worry as he landed, his body trembling from fever and the shakes of extreme fatigue. His Wildcat, riddled with bullet holes, was a testament to the chaos he had endured, yet he emerged every time, alive and ready for the next fight. The Japanese, believing him to be dead after a series of crashes and ocean ditchings, were in shock when he returned again and again. Foss had become a ghost, a legend, and a nightmare for enemy pilots, all while fighting his own physical demons. Malaria had claimed his strength, sapping over 30 pounds from his frame. leaving him a skeletal shadow of the man who had climbed into his first Wildcat just months earlier. For 4 hours at a time, he floated in shark-infested waters after his plane was shot down, relying on nothing but patience, calm, and survival instinct. The same hunting instincts that made him a deadly ace now kept him alive against predators both human and natural. Each mission pushed him to the brink, but he never hesitated. The price of victory was steep, and Foss was paying it in every possible way: his body, his health, and his energy. Yet the cost extended beyond the physical. Emotional strain, mental fatigue, and the knowledge that every misstep could mean death for him or his squadron weighed heavily on Foss. Every kill, every victory brought him closer to legend, but also closer to collapse. The Pacific skies were unforgiving and the enemy relentless. There was no room for error. Despite this, Foss's determination never wavered. He had learned to lead, to anticipate, and to survive, not just because of training or doctrine, but because of an unbreakable spirit forged by hardship on the farm. By the time he was grounded for good, Joe Foss had become an icon of American courage. The farm boy who had shot down 26 Japanese planes in just 44 days survived where others fell. He became a symbol of resilience and ingenuity, proving that the cost of victory is measured not just in medals or records, but in the strength and sacrifice required to reach them. Foss's story reminds us that even the greatest triumphs are often shadowed by immense struggle, and that every hero carries a price few can see. After surviving the grueling skies of Guadalcanal and breaking the all-time American record, Joe Foss returned home a changed man. The farm boy who had once aimed at jackrabbits across South Dakota was now America's ace of aces, celebrated nationwide for his courage, skill, and ingenuity. Yet despite the fame, Foss remained grounded in spirit, in values, and in the lessons of his past. The same grit and determination that had carried him through life's hardships on the farm continued to define him long after the war ended. On May 18, 1943, Joe Foss stood in the White House as President Franklin D. Roosevelt placed the Medal of Honor around his neck. The citation praised his dauntless courage and incomparable combat skill, a recognition of a man who had achieved the extraordinary in the face of impossible odds. But Foss's true legacy was not just in medals or records. It was in the hope and inspiration he provided. At a time when the United States faced setbacks and uncertainty, the story of a farm boy outsmarting the feared Japanese, Zero gave the nation a symbol of resilience and ingenuity, proof that ordinary individuals could accomplish extraordinary feats. Foss's influence extended beyond his personal achievements in the air. The deflection shooting and thatch weave tactics he perfected became standard doctrine for the Pacific Fleet. Entire squadrons were trained using his methods, and countless lives were saved as a result. The Japanese, once confident in the invincibility of their aircraft, learned to fear the unpredictability of the American Wildcat under Foss's command. His approach reshaped aerial combat strategy, proving that intelligence and anticipation could outmatch technology and experience. Even after leaving the military, Foss continued to serve his community and country. He returned to South Dakota, using his fame not for personal gain, but for public service. He was elected to the state legislature, later becoming governor in 1954. His leadership mirrored the same principles that had guided him in the sky: careful planning, courage in the face of adversity, and the ability to inspire those around him. Foss's later role as the first commissioner of the American Football League further demonstrated his commitment to leadership and vision, showing that his skills extended far beyond the cockpit. Above all, Joe Foss never forgot his roots. The farm boy who learned patience, observation, and precision in the cold plains of South Dakota remained humble, grounded, and approachable. He embodied the truth that great victories are often achieved not through advanced technology or formal education alone, but through perseverance, creativity, and a clear understanding of the environment, whether it is a frozen farm field or the skies over Guadalcanal. Foss passed away in 2003, but his story continues to inspire. He represents the timeless lesson that ordinary individuals, armed with courage, intelligence, and relentless determination, can achieve the extraordinary. From hunting jackrabbits to hunting Japanese Zeros, Joe Foss's life proves that greatness often begins with simple skills, honed over time, and the willingness to trust one's instincts. His legacy endures not only in history books, but in every pilot, leader, and dreamer who dares to challenge the impossible.